A robbery was taking place in one of the London banks, but nobody in the police knew which one. The police, having received orders to check all the banks in the area, arrived at Lloyds Bank, located on Baker Street, went down to the doors of the bank vault and wanted to check for signs of tampering. Inside the vault, holding their breath, was a team of robbers. The team of thieves were warned by radio that the police were about to arrive at the bank, but it was too late to withdraw. Only one metal door separated the police and the robbers. Anthony Gavin's gang was closer than ever to failure. The Baker Street robbery is one of the most infamous robberies in history, giving rise to many similar robberies and mysterious conspiracy theories. The robbers planned everything down to the smallest detail and used a unique method that no one ever used to rob a bank before. And yet, the robbery, which in all respects should have been flawless, did not become the perfect robbery due to many factors. But why? Anthony Gavin, a 38-year-old photographer who had extensive connections in the London underworld, always dreamed of pulling off the big one. Strong and athletic, Gavin lived more or less in prosperity and was not strapped for cash. But the big one was a chance to earn big and finally live the life he always wanted without having to photograph a wedding or any other event ever again, of which there were hundreds in his portfolio. Anthony always liked the idea of robbing a bank, which he began seriously working on in 1970. Before becoming a photographer, Gavin was a physical training instructor in the British Army. He knew how to control himself and had iron self-discipline. But his plans never included a traditional robbery in which he would break into a bank, start screaming, threaten the staff, and then, if he managed to get the money, run away from the police as fast as he could. Well-versed and smart, Gavin believed that he could do it much more subtly. There were a lot of thoughts floating around in his head on how to pull it off, but Anthony got the main idea from the story The Red-Headed League by Arthur Conan Doyle, where the robbers were planning to rob the bank in a very unusual way, by digging a tunnel from the basement of a neighboring building straight into the bank's vault. The men managed to get into the vault, but unfortunately for them, the legendary Sherlock Holmes was waiting for them inside. Gavin may have been influenced by the 1942 comedy film Larceny Inc., which featured a bank robbery with a similar modus operandi. It was a very difficult plan to implement, but Anthony Gavin really liked it, and if everything was executed perfectly, then there was a solid chance of everything working out. But he would never be able to pull it off alone. He needed reliable and skillful people. Anthony Gavin, who was rumored to be a member of Brain Reader's Gang of Thieves, one of Britain's top groups of robbers and burglars, was never on the police's radar and was completely unknown to the authorities. To implement the plan, if possible, he decided to recruit the same clean people. Reg Tucker had no criminal record, and his main activity was selling used cars. Gavin had known him for a long time and believed that he was the right man for the job. Having invited Tucker to the pub, Anthony Gavin briefly spoke about the upcoming business opportunity and invited him to participate. Reg Tucker did not agree immediately, but the prospect of earning a tidy sum, an extraordinary plan, and his friend's conviction of inevitable success forced him to agree. The next accomplice was Bobby Mills, who was recommended by one of the best thieves in Britain, Brain Reader. Many sources claim that Reader also took part in the robbery, although later Reader himself categorically denied the rumor, which is exactly something what an accomplished robber would say. Soon, 5 or more members joined the heist, and almost nothing is known about 3 of them. One of the mysterious 3 was someone called Little Legs, a common nickname for someone of short stature. The second was known as an even more mysterious TH. The third unknown person was a young woman. The remaining 2 men were Mickey Skinny Gervais and Tommy Tanner. Both were quite experienced criminals and were excellent at their specialization. The first, Mickey Gervais, was an expert in burglar alarms and, more importantly, knew how to bypass them. The second, Tommy Tanner, was an explosives expert. Tanner tried his hand at being a burglar by blowing up safes, stealing payslips, and the like throughout London and the inner counties. And yet, Anthony Gavin hoped that Tanner's expert skills would not be needed and that it would be possible to get into the bank's vault without exploding anything. But what bank? Anthony Gavin had several victims on his list, and for a long time, he debated which bank he should choose to implement his grandiose plans. Ultimately, Lloyds Bank was chosen, located by luck on Baker Street, the same street where Gavin's beloved Sherlock Holmes allegedly lived. Gavin knew that this bank, with its excellent level of security, was very popular among the rich, and given how much time and work the robbery would take, Gavin would only agree if the take from the heist was worth the effort. To start, Gavin handed his first recruit, Reg Tucker, an envelope containing £500 and told Tucker to put on his best suit, take the money to Lloyds Bank, and open an account. This was just a ruse. The main objective of his move was to find out what the bank's vault looked like, what size it was, and what kind of alarm system it had. Therefore, Reg Tucker soon went to the bank and asked to rent a safe deposit box. The bank employees, responding to his request, answered in detail to all the questions asked by Tucker about the bank and its cell, and, as if by chance, Tucker decided to ask about the alarm. Most interesting to note was the fact that, aside from the tremblers, no other electric alarm devices were present in the vault, and an innocent conversation between him and the bank staff confirmed that the vault door operated on a time lock. Since Tucker needed to know everything about the vault, he became a regular visitor to the bank. Once Tucker was alone in the vault, he measured the room using his arm span and the umbrella he brought with him. He was greatly helped by the fact that the floor was covered with tiles, each of which was 9 inches, 23 centimeters square. The layout of the vault had to be drawn up to the smallest detail, as it was necessary to determine exactly where to dig the tunnel and where in the vault there would be an exit hole from which the robbers would crawl out. The bank employees, each time escorting Tucker to the safe deposit box, left him alone. As a cover, Tucker would remove his box from its locked pigeonhole, trying to make enough noise to satisfy the expectations of the staff outside. After that, he began to work, but this could not take too much time, as the staff would become suspicious. As a result, over several months, Tucker had to visit the bank 13 times to create a complete vault plan. Of course, to implement the plan, the necessary equipment was also needed. To this end, Gavin turned to another friend, also a used car salesman named Thomas Stevens. When Gavin offered him the opportunity to make a lot of money quickly, he jumped at the opportunity. Handing over the envelope with the money, Gavin gave his friend some instructions. Everything on the list had to be purchased in cash and under different aliases, outside the local area and from different suppliers. Gavin didn't want some hardware store clerk to suddenly remember that someone had bought all the equipment from him, which could greatly aid the police in identifying the culprits. The equipment ranged from aluminum ladders to a heavy-duty jack and a vaunted thermal lance. Ladders were needed to remove soil while digging a tunnel quickly and efficiently. Each ladder would have to be cut into several pieces and fixed to the bottom of the tunnel, turning it into a makeshift rail system. The one who was doing the digging had to pour the soil into the cart, and when the cart was filled to the brim, the other one, who was at the top, had to use a rope to pull the cart up, clear it of soil, and return the cart down the tunnel to the digger. The wheels of the cart needed some work to fit on the side of the rails, but this was quickly dealt with by the most technically gifted members of the gang. A heavy-duty jack and thermal lance were needed to break into the vault. This ensured a fairly quiet penetration, during which the alarm should not have gone off. And if everything made sense with the jack, then the principle of operation of the thermal lance was more complex. A thermal lance, in simple terms, worked similarly to a regular burner, with the difference that its temperature reached over 4,500 degrees Celsius. This temperature should have been enough to cut through reinforced concrete without much interference. Everything was ready for the execution of the plan, except the final piece of the puzzle. The team still lacked the building that they would use to begin digging the tunnel. On Baker Street, units were constantly rented out, but Anthony Gavin could not just rent any one of them. It had to meet several criteria. Firstly, the premises had to be on the same side of the street as the bank. Secondly, it had to be located in direct proximity to the bank so the robbers didn't have to dig a lengthy tunnel. Finally, in May 1971, they found the perfect location. Lasac, a leather goods store located on 182 Baker Street, was a stone's throw away from Lloyds Bank. When Gavin saw the For Lease sign on the window, he immediately contacted 64-year-old small businessman Benjamin Wolfe to have him arrange the lease in his name instead of using his own. Benjamin Wolfe knew several members of the heist team and had some connections in the criminal world. But why the cautious Gavin needed to attract another person when he or anyone else from his team could just as easily rent the premises is unclear. Perhaps he didn't want landlords to know his face, although this could have been avoided. Gavin was most interested in whether Lissac had a cellar. When Benjamin Wolfe met with the landlords, he carefully examined the premises and received an affirmative answer to the question of whether there was a basement on the premises. He returned to Gavin and spoke in detail about the layout of the store. Without further ado, Gavin handed Wolfe the £10,000 needed to buy the lease for the entire building. With so much money, plus money for equipment and opening a bank account, it's hard not to wonder why Gavin needed to rob the bank in the first place. However, even if all the money used to pay the upfront charges really did belong to Gavin, which is not confirmed, in the future he could own millions, which, of course, was much more tempting. But to get millions and not get caught by the authorities, everything had to be done perfectly. Benjamin Wolfe knew that the lease of the store was connected with some kind of criminal activity, and clearly understood that if something happened, he would be an accomplice. Despite this, he made the grave mistake of signing the lease for the store under his own name. Nothing prevented Wolfe from giving some other fictitious name, or, if documents were needed, from making a false passport. But Benjamin Wolfe committed an unforgivable blunder and did not tell Gavin anything about it. Given Gavin's attention to detail and careful planning for other parts of the heist, it is very surprising that he did not double-check this information. Lissac was now theirs. So heist members disguised as construction workers began delivering materials needed to build the tunnel to the store. All the windows were covered with window glue, which made it difficult to see what was going on inside from the street. There was a notice on the door stating that the store was under new management and would reopen once renovations were completed. It was decided to start digging the tunnel on Friday evening, before the August bank holiday. Having gone down to the basement and marked the starting point, Anthony Gavin picked up an electric jackhammer and began to hammer away at the concrete. The concrete was only 6 inches thick and was penetrated without any problems. There was another problem, however. Directly next door, located just behind the walls between the Lloyds Bank and the Lissac store, was a Chicken Inn diner, in which the working jackhammer could be clearly heard. The staff at the Chicken Inn were aware that the premises next door had changed hands and would be undergoing renovations, but jackhammering on a Friday night? That was suspicious. Of course, Gavin and his team did not want to attract any unwanted attention, so they agreed to dig the tunnel only on weekends. Many establishments in the area, including Lloyds Bank, were closed over the weekend, but the Chicken Inn was open all weekend and stayed open until midnight. The robbers couldn't do anything about it, but the noisiest work was carried out after midnight when the dinner staff went home. If the tunnel calculations were incorrect, there was a risk of crawling out somewhere on the sidewalk of the street or in the Chicken Inn. So measurements were taken using string tied at 1 yard, 92-centimeter intervals, and compared with compass readings. Finally, in early September, the digging of the tunnel was completed. Its length was 40 feet, and the amount of earth and other waste amounted to more than 8 tons, which was hauled back into Lissac and dumped towards the rear of the premises. Everything was ready for the most important part of the mission, breaking into the vault. But there was one big problem: the alarm system. It was hoped that using the jack would not trigger the devices, but this was only a hope, not a certainty. Surprisingly, this problem soon had a solution, and it was not influenced in any way by Anthony Gavin or any of his gang members. Outside the bank, near the corner where Marylebone Road met Baker Street, the water board had decided to carry out a replacement of the main pipes. To reduce the impact on traffic, it was decided to carry out the work during the night. The work was carried out using pneumatic drills and excavators, which created vibrations, causing silent alarms to go off in the bank vault. So the bank employees decided to temporarily disable this alarm until the road work was completed. Mickey Gervais, the man responsible for the alarm system on the heist team, found out about this through his sources and instantly shared the good news with Gavin. He, of course, was elated, as this incredible turn of events solved the biggest headache associated with the alarm. Now nothing prevented the robbers from carrying out their plans. They could have pulled off the perfect heist. The robbery, or a break-and-enter with intent, to be more precise, was scheduled for the evening of Friday, September 10th. Everyone knew what was going to happen and what role they had to play in the unfolding drama. observer Bobby Mills was placed on the roof of the opposite building, who, in case of anything suspicious, was supposed to inform the gang by radio. The heist team itself used a 100-ton hydraulic jack to make a hole in the storage facility, but nothing worked. The reinforced concrete floor of the vault, which was 3 feet, did not want to budge. Instead, the floor of the dug tunnel began to give way. As it turned out, in the place where the tunnel ended and the jack was used, there used to be an old underground well, and even railway sleepers, which were installed on the floor to prevent it from sagging, could not help. The attempt to get into the vault using a jack was scrapped. Next up was the thermal lance. Reg Tucker, who was drawing up the plans for the vault, knew how to use a thermal lance, so the dangerous mission of cutting through reinforced concrete was entrusted to him. Working in the limited space of the tunnel, pieces of hot concrete began to fall on him. The acrid smoke made it difficult to breathe and penetrated inside Lesac. Fearing that the acrid stench would somehow penetrate the chicken inn or seep through the front door onto the street, and that someone passing by would smell that something was burning and call the fire brigade, Gavin called a break. Neither the jack nor the thermal lance brought the robbers closer to their goal. Moreover, these were the only relatively quiet ways by which the gang was going to break into the vault. They still had one last option, however. Anthony Gavin really hoped that he would not need the professional skills of the explosives expert Tommy Tanner, but there was no other way. Either blow up the reinforced concrete or retreat. Using a drill and long, heavy-duty drill bits, Tanner, while in a tunnel under the vault, drilled a series of holes that formed a square and pushed gelignite, an industrial explosive intended for use in quarries and mines, into these holes. Preparations for the explosion took a long time, largely hampered by the smoke from the thermal lance that still had not dissipated, causing Tommy Tanner to climb in and out of the tunnel several times. Finally, when the explosives were planted and everything was ready for the explosion, the team went home. They were all tired and half suffocated from the fumes, and besides, they still had plenty of time, since the bank only opened on Monday. On Saturday evening, Tommy Tanner connected wires to the holes filled with gelinite and climbed out of the tunnel to the outside of Lesac. All that was left was to light up the wires that served as a detonator, and the path inside the vault would be open. But there was a problem. The explosion was loud and would likely have been heard by both people on the street and those inside the chicken inn. Anthony Gavin came up with an idea on how to mask the noise. He turned on the jackhammer and briefly began working on a section of the floor, not to dig it out, but to hide the noise of the explosion. At the same time, Tanner touched the bare ends of the fuse wires to a battery. The vault explosives blew up. Gavin eagerly crawled along the tunnel to check the result of their work, and, lo and behold, the floor in the vault was broken. The only problem was that the hole was too narrow, and to widen it, they once again had to use the thermal lance, which, of course, filled the vault and the tunnel with suffocating smoke. The job of widening the hole was not quick, but it was still done perfectly. The thieves crawled along the tunnel into the vault, and, once inside, exhaled joyfully. The long months of hard work were well spent. The robbers set about the deposit boxes with great passion. Fortunately, they were surrounded by thick concrete walls, and the noise made from breaking into the boxes could not be heard from the outside. Doors were smashed and pried from the hinges, the boxes pulled out, and the contents emptied onto canvas ground sheets. Considering that the bank never checked what was in the boxes, and clients could store whatever they wanted there, the contents of these secret boxes were amazing. Stacks of cash, jewelry, luxury watches, gold coins and bars, love letters, photographs, and family heirlooms. The list could be endless, but the huge number of large denomination banknotes told Gavin that the result of this work would exceed all his wildest expectations. As the operation continued, the loot was collected into bags, and they decided to do the sorting at the end when the vault was cleared. Despite already making a fortune, it soon became clear that they would not be able to remain in the vault for long. The acrid smoke still didn't dissipate from the vault, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. Choking and coughing, Gavin called a halt, and, already at Lesac, the team decided that that was enough for the day. But not everyone agreed with this. Bobby Mills, who was on the roof and tired of sitting alone and doing nothing, was categorically against it. Gavin radioed him that due to the vapor situation, it was impossible to work, and the job would be postponed until the morning. Everyone had to go home, but Mills had to stay on the roof and watched what was happening near the bank. Mills had a different opinion. He was tired and cold, wanted to sleep, and did not want to stupidly sit on the roof until 8 in the morning, until the gang came back to Lasac. A quarrel ensued, which was resolved by one of the gang members, who told Mills over the radio the following: "If it was possible for us to work on, we'd all be working. We've been working non-stop all day. Put the earplugs in your ear, have the radio on. It'll effing wake you. It'll be like an alarm call, won't it? Over." Mills' attitude immediately changed, and he became compliant, replying, "I'll stay here, I'll stay awake. Will you try and get in a bit earlier, all right?" Mills was assured that the gang would return as soon as possible, alerting him to the fact by sending the alarm call. During this altercation, a lot of secret information regarding the robbery was given out, and if anyone had heard them, they would have realized that a bank was being robbed somewhere in London and would most likely have reported it to the police. Unfortunately for the robbers, the person who was listening to all this turned out to be an avid radio amateur, Robert Rowlands. Robert Rowlands was planning to go to bed early, after reading a book and maybe listening to his radio. Turning on his receiver, he realized he had inadvertently left it set to a CB frequency. In those days, while CB, Citizens Band Radio, had taken off in a big way in the United States, it was still illegal in the UK. Even though the use of CB radio was banned, a growing number of people used it as a medium for communicating with one another. Rowlands had no desire to listen to anyone other than his beloved Radio Luxembourg, but a conversation he overheard made him wary. The men were talking on the radio and, apparently, were discussing some kind of robbery in which they had participated. When one of the men mentioned that they already had 400,000, Mr. Rowlands thought that was a local tobacco shop, and being raided was the figure mentioned for the cigarettes. Without delay, Mr. Rowlands called the police and reported that a robbery was taking place somewhere nearby. The attendant was dismissive. It was a Saturday night, after all, and it was not uncommon for revelers to pull pranks by calling the police. He suggested that Rowlands record the conversation and hung up. Many in Rowlands' place would have been offended. After all, the police ignored the citizen's message, considering him a buffoon, but Rowlands was from a different stock. Instead of going to bed as he had previously planned, Rowlands took out a cassette recorder, placed it near the radio, and began recording the conversation of the criminals. This went on for 2 hours. Convinced that he had enough evidence, Rowlands called again, not to the regular police, but to Scotland Yard, believing that these guys should take him more seriously. He was correct in his assumption. They listened to Rowlands and sent 2 officers to his home. After listening to the recordings, the officers contacted their superiors. The officers were ordered to stay at the Rowlands house and listen to what the robbers were saying. Perhaps they would compromise themselves even further, but no new information was forthcoming. The robbers simply fell silent. And no wonder. After all, Anthony Gavin and his team temporarily scattered home and got in touch only at 8:30 in the morning. Listening to the recordings, the officers determined that it wasn't a tobacco store that was being robbed, but a bank. But which one and where? Using his expertise in radio communications, Rowlands said the robbery was taking place no more than a mile from his home. The detectives became curious about where such confidence came from. Mr. Rowlands said the robbers used handheld transceivers with their pitiful telescopic antennas that could only transmit signals over short distances. The police did not pay enough attention to this information, apparently believing that the average citizen could not be smarter than the policeman from Scotland Yard. They focused on the robbers' renewed conversations, hoping that they would give themselves away. But it turned out the other way around. The thieves soon disappeared from the air entirely. The reason for this was the waiter from Chicken Inn. He heard some noises coming from the bank and decided to check what was going on by going outside and looking through the window of Lloyds Bank. Bobby Mills, who was sitting on the roof and did not lose his vigilance, immediately reported this to his partners on the radio. Luckily, the waiter left soon. But what would he do next? What if he called the police? During the conversation, Mills also mentioned that drilling had just begun at a nearby road job. This was an unexpected development, as the construction crew was not due to start work until Monday. Gavin ordered the team to retreat from the vault as quickly as possible. He cryptically reported this to Mills and ended with the words, "Would you like to change to the other channel? Over." This was the last recording the police heard, and yet the robbers gave a lot of clues, which Robert Rowlands immediately noticed. Roadworks were going on somewhere near the bank, and if a robbery took place within a mile radius, now the bank in question was much easier to find. The police were dismissive, pointing out that on Sundays there was often roadwork going on throughout the area. Another point that Rowlands reported, which was also missed by the police, was that there was some kind of retail establishment open for business next to the bank. In those years, Sunday commerce was prohibited in many places, so it was worth looking for banks next to which there was an open establishment, namely the Chicken Inn next to Lloyds Bank. Of course, this detail was also ignored by the police. It appears that Mr. Rowlands was more well-equipped to handle such a case than the Scotland Yard officers themselves. After it became clear that the police would no longer hear the thieves, something had to be done urgently. In a hurry, they decided to check all the banks in the area within an 8-mile radius of Mr. Rowlands' address. There were no less than 750 banks in the search area, a formidable task given the time constraints facing the police. All free law enforcement employees were mobilized to participate in the operation. In the meantime, each bank key holder was to be contacted and brought to the appropriate bank to allow officers to enter to check for signs of forced entry. At the same time, Anthony Gavin and his team, returning from the storage facility in Lassac, were waiting for news from Bobby Mills. They expected that the waiter who heard the noise might have called the police, but it soon became clear that he did not, given that a lot of time had passed and no one from the police showed up. The robbers decided to return to the bank, where work to empty the vault of wealth resumed. Realizing that they could be overheard, the gang stopped using hammers and drills and instead began unlocking doors with crowbars. Fortunately for them, although slower, the lockboxes fell to this crude method just as agreeably. At this time, police officers throughout the city were checking each of the 750 banks. Lloyds Bank's turn came at 15:30. The police, together with Mr. Davies, who was the assistant manager of Lloyd's Baker Street branch, entered the building and verified that the alarm was on and that no alarms had been triggered. The officers then asked to inspect the vault and were led through a locked metal gate down to the vault door. After examining the scene, they were convinced that there was nothing unusual there either. One of the officers then asked Mr. Davies to open the vault door so they could look inside. On the other side of the door, holding their breath and not moving, were the robbers. Most likely, Bobby Mills warned them by radio that the police were raiding the bank, but it was too late to run away, and if the officers had been able to open the door, it would have been all over. But the police, just like anyone else, couldn't do it. The door was on an automatic time lock and wouldn't release itself until opening time the next day. In simple terms, bank employees, just before going home, set a timer for a certain number of hours after which the door to the vault could be opened. Having finished work on Friday at 5 p.m., they set the timer for Monday at 9 a.m., and until that time, no one, not even a bank employee, could get inside. The police and the bank employees essentially had their hands tied. After carefully examining the door and not noticing any signs of forced entry, the officers thanked Mr. Davis for his assistance and waited for him to reset the alarm and close the front door. Mr. Davis returned home, and police said Lloyd's Bank on Baker Street was clear. Anthony Gavin and his gang breathed a sigh of relief. Having decided that they had had enough risk for one day, the robbers decided to call it a day. They did not break into the main bank safe, where a huge amount of cash was usually stored. Rightly considering that another explosion or the use of a thermal lance was a big risk, especially when the entire London police were on their heads. Even without the main safe, the team managed to open 268 boxes, the contents of which they soon divided among themselves. Before leaving, the robbers took great care not to leave any evidence behind. Fortunately, there was no need to erase fingerprints, since the criminals already wore gloves from the very beginning. Countless bags of valuables were stuffed into a van with fake license plates parked in a small private yard at the back of the store before Gavin and another gang member drove it away. The remaining gang members walked out of Lassac one by one onto the pedestrianized Baker Street. On the opposite roof, Bobby Mills was still watching. He counted the gang and, seeing that the last of them had left, gathered his things, went down to the ground, and went to the location where the criminals were going to divide the loot. One of the most notorious and daring robberies in Great Britain in the 20th century, as it would later be called by the media, was carried out successfully. It was a normal Monday morning at Lloyds Bank on Baker Street. Bank employees came to work and prepared for the coming day. At 9 a.m., the timer on the time lock expired and the door to the storage room opened. Swinging open the heavy door and flipping the switches, the bank employees found themselves inside the vault. They were stopped by a scene of complete devastation. The cabinet doors were bent and askew, hanging on their hinges, and the floor was littered with discarded deposit boxes. It became clear that of all the 750 banks that the police checked, it was Lloyds Bank on Baker Street that was unlucky. Police arrived quickly, and the area around the bank was cordoned off, awaiting the arrival of forensic investigators. Among the chaos of discarded boxes, their attention was drawn to a message scrawled on the safe. Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one. But what caught their eye the most was the hole in the floor of the vault. It was necessary to find where the tunnel was dug from. The police went outside to inspect the buildings adjacent to the bank. After visiting the Chicken Inn and making sure that the tunnel was not dug from there, the officers headed to the deserted and rather suspicious Lissac. Naturally, there was no one there, and, having received the necessary warrant, the police broke in and, going down to the basement, found the second crime scene. The place was full of tools and cutting equipment, and at one end of the store, there was a mountain of dirt. The police had a lot of work to do, and time was running out. Anthony Gavin's heist team was quickly dubbed the Walkie-Talkie Gang due to their use of walkie-talkies. The Walkie-Talkie Gang cleared the vault of an estimated $200,000 to £4 million, but it appears that the true fake was significantly higher. News of the robbery quickly spread across the country, and the media actively began to reproach the police for incompetence, and, truth be told, they had every reason to do so. The authorities understood that to restore their reputation, they needed to find the robbers as quickly as possible. Up to 100 detectives worked on the case, organized into 4 teams, one examining the scene, one contacting the known safety box owners, one covering the coordination from the control center, and one team dealing with all external inquiries. Many fingerprints were found at the crime scene, but most of them belonged to bank employees and customers. In the Lissac basement, a thorough examination of each item did not yield any clues. After analyzing radio recordings, Scotland Yard soon announced that they were looking for a gang of 5 people, one of the gang members being a woman. Police later expanded their search to include 5 more. The only problem was where to look for them. It seemed like the robbery had been executed perfectly. Just in case, the police decided to find out who was renting Lissac, and they quickly found Benjamin Wolfe, the same simpleton who bothered to rent the store under his own name. Of course, Wolfe had already learned about the robbery on Baker Street and had to understand that sooner or later the police would come to him. But none of Anthony Gavin's team knew what kind of idiot Wolfe was. They already knew that the police had recordings of their voices, but they believed that this was the only evidence. Instead of calling Wolfe in for questioning, the police decided to find out everything they needed through secret methods. Inquiries were made about Wolfe's financial affairs, and it soon became clear that he could not have spent £10,000 on renting Lissac, since, judging by tax records, he simply did not have this kind of money, at least not legally. On the other hand, Wolfe had no criminal record and was not associated with members of the criminal underworld, but at that time the police suspected that he was the organizer of the robbery. Wolfe became a very interesting figure for C11, a highly specialized subunit of the Metropolitan Police's Criminal Investigation Department, CID. Having received the appropriate permissions, C11 installed wiretapping on all phones to which Benjamin Wolfe had access. The first recordings showed that his voice was not heard in any of the recorded radio conversations, but this was not the main purpose of the wiretaps. The police wanted to know who he was talking to and whether he had said anything about the robbery, the whereabouts of the criminals, and the stolen property. Small groups of employees monitored his home and followed him wherever he went, hoping to find out who he was communicating with. But it was all in vain. Benjamin Wolfe was either hiding something very well or was entirely not involved. At this point, the investigation could have stalled if not for police informants who, out of nowhere, learned 2 names associated with the robbery: Thomas Stevens and Reg Tucker. It looks like someone from the gang had spilled the beans about the case. Once Stevens and Tucker became the target of C11, it quickly became apparent from their behavior that they were quite secretive and suspicious people. Telephone wiretaps were used again, and officers began to monitor their every move. The main discovery was that Stevens, Tucker, and Benjamin Wolfe came into contact with a certain man, whose name later became known as Anthony Gavin. C11 made inquiries, and it turned out that this man had recently bought a pub in Dalston, but it was unclear where he got the money for it. The police also noted with interest that Gavin's voice was remarkably similar to one of those recorded on Robert Rowland's voice recorder. Through informants, Scotland Yard learned that at least one of the robbers had fled to France. The police had no way of identifying the suspect, and even if they had, they couldn't bring him in for questioning because there were no extradition agreements between the countries. Gradually, the authorities developed a complete picture of the movements and connections of the main suspects, but none of them made mistakes that could lead to arrest. No one except Reg Tucker, who blabbed on the phone about a large sum that was to be transferred to a certain Abdullah Hassan Ganji. A meeting between them was scheduled for the next day, and, deciding not to miss such a great chance to catch the criminals red-handed, the police decided to act. It was decided that if Reg Tucker could be arrested, then Gavin, Stevens, and Wolf would be arrested on the same day. The next day, C-11 and CID officers, some of them armed in case the suspects had weapons, tracked Tucker to the meeting place. Arriving at the appointed place, Tucker parked and remained in the car to wait for Ganji, who arrived a few minutes later. Taking a small briefcase containing money, Tucker got out of his car, sat in the back seat of Ganji's car, and a few minutes later came out, only now without the bag. As he walked to his car, Ganji turned around and drove away. The order to strike was given, and two unmarked cars drove onto the road at speed, stopping on either side of Tucker's car to corner it. Tucker had just settled into the driver's seat when he suddenly found himself surrounded by detectives with revolvers at the ready. He was pulled out of the car and handcuffed before he even realized what was happening. The second car, in which Abdullah Hassan Ganji and his nephew were sitting, was seized around the corner in a similar manner. After this, the police descended on Gavin, Stevens, and Wolf. The criminals found themselves at home and, at the sight of the police, surrendered without any resistance. But it was still necessary to prove that they were all participants in the daring robbery on Baker Street. £32,000 was found in a briefcase that Reg Tucker gave to Abdullah Hassan Ganji. When asked what this money was intended for, Abdullah Hassan Ganji answered something about a business related to currency, which hardly convinced the police. Benjamin Wolf steadfastly denied any knowledge of the bank raid or any involvement in it. He insisted that he purchased the lease on someone else's behalf and never visited the place after that. However, when pressed further, Wolf refused to name the person on whose behalf he was acting and could not give a satisfactory answer as to why this unknown person was unable or unwilling to arrange the lease himself. As for Anthony Gavin, Reg Tucker, and Thomas Stevens, they were all uncooperative, refusing to answer questions put to them by the police. When Gavin was shown the recordings of the radio conversations, he categorically denied that he was one of the speakers. Searches were carried out on all properties linked to those arrested, leading police to the discovery of £231,000, which they determined had been stolen from the vault. After a few days of exhaustive questioning, the police charged Gavin, Tucker, Stevens, and Wolf with the burglary of goods to the value of £1.5 million, plus the possession of explosives. The two Ganjis were charged with handling stolen goods, and together the 6 men were remanded in custody to await trial. The trial of the 4 gang members and the 2 Ganjis began on January 2, 1973, and lasted 19 days. Ganji and his nephew were acquitted. Benjamin Wolf was found guilty on both counts. Initially, they wanted to give him 12 years, but the judge considered his age, 64 years old, and sentenced him to 8 years in prison. I wonder if Wolf was, say, 75 years old, would they even let him go home? Summing up, the judge described the robbery as a daring crime that demonstrated the extraordinary ingenuity and determination of those who carried it out. Anthony Gavin, Reg Tucker, and Thomas Stevens were each sentenced to 12 years in prison. They could have gotten rid of the sentence entirely by revealing the names of other members of the robbery, but they did not. But even such a serious sentence, they had reason to rejoice. The police found only a small fraction of the money that they stole from the bank. Their money was safely hidden away and was waiting for its owners upon their release, ensuring many years of a comfortable life. But were these riches worth 12 years in prison? Such a large robbery gave rise to numerous rumors, many of which have not been dispelled to this day. Having broken into hundreds of cells, the robbers saw their contents, among which there could have been a lot of things that were not intended for prying eyes. There were rumors that photographs of a member of parliament who was involved in pedophilia at the time were found in one of the boxes. The bandits did not consider using these photographs for purpose of, say, blackmail, and simply left them scattered on the floor, where they could be picked up and examined by the police. In response to these rumors, the police stated that there was no such material at the crime scene. But one must consider the fact that the 70s were a particularly corrupt time for the London police, including Scotland Yard, and this has been well documented. For example, one of Scotland Yard's top detectives, Alec Eist, had been linked to numerous corruption charges brought against him. Who knows if the police were telling the truth or if they simply hid incriminating photographs to save the politician's skin. Speculation was also fueled by what alleged to be a D notice issued by authorities to the press. A D notice is a formal request to news editors not to publish or broadcast material on certain topics due to national security concerns. The police did not go to the press when news of the bank robbery first began to leak, but that was while the robbery was still in progress. This made sense. The police simply didn't want the robbers to find out through the press that they were being followed. The press indeed obeyed the unofficial order for a time, but when considerable details of the robbery became clear, the press was no longer going to remain silent. Television, radio, and newspapers were full of news about the daring robbery, and if the D notice officially existed, then, of course, the press would not have behaved in the manner they did. Perhaps the loudest rumor involved the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret sailed against the wind more than once, and her personal life often became the subject of lush speculation. Gossips claimed that during a sex party in which the free-spirited Princess Margaret was the main guest, a certain Michael X secretly took several photos of her in a group sex environment. Originally from Trinidad, Michael X was a seriously dubious person who managed to serve 2 terms in prison and, when faced with another sentence, fled to his native Trinidad. He planned to use the photographs of the royal person if the British authorities began to pursue him. He kept compromising evidence on the princess in a safe deposit box at Lloyds Bank. A similar theory was actively developed by the 2008 film The Bank Job, starring Jason Statham. This is the only decent feature film based on the robbery on Baker Street, but the authenticity of the events in it is questionable at best. The film reported that the British intelligence services, in order to save the royal family from shame, ordered a robbery to remove photographs from the vault. This rumor, it must be said, was widespread long before the release of the film. Those who spread the rumor did not seem to fully understand what powers MI5 and MI6 had. If it were known that such potentially compromising material existed and was in the hands of a convicted criminal on the run, there would be no need for the heist. Permission would be obtained at the highest level to allow MI5 to enter the vault and remove all sensitive material from the safe. Of course, they wouldn't want this to become known, so they would go directly to the senior management at Lloyds and with their help go into the vault, open the desired box, and take what they need. In any case, all documented facts related to the Lloyds Bank robbery will not be published until 100 years after the robbery took place, and that is in the distant 2071, a year that most of us will not live to see. Although it is doubtful that 800 pages of documents will remain untampered during the 100 years, should it be necessary to protect the interests of the state. The method that members of the Anthony Gavin gang used during the robbery was subsequently encountered more than once in different parts of the world. In 1977, a bank robbery took place at the Standard Bank in Krugersdorp, South Africa. The criminals stole more than $20 million, if adjusting for today's dollar value. Everything was similar to the Bank Street robbery, but unlike the London bandits, the African police never found out who was involved in the robbery. The robbers from South Africa were clearly inspired by the work of Anthony Gavin and did some serious homework to avoid Gavin's mistakes. In particular, having rented an empty store near the bank, it did not occur to them to give their real name for the lease. In 2010, in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, thieves robbed a bank of between $25 million and $70 million by tunneling a giant tunnel about 16 feet deep and a whopping 100 feet long. Again, their inspiration appears to have been the Baker Street robbery, although by 2010 there had already been many similar robberies. The stolen identity card of a taxi driver was used to rent the premises from which the tunnel was dug from. But in terms of diligence, robbers from Brazil particularly stand out. In 2005, to get to the bank, they dug a tunnel that was an eye-popping 256 feet, 78 meters long. It's crazy what some people are willing to do to avoid earning money through honest work. Robert Rowlands, for his part of being an honest and diligent citizen, playing a crucial role in solving the robbery on Baker Street by recording the thieves' conversations on a voice recorder instead of praise and encouragement, was almost brought to justice for unauthorized listening of radio broadcasts. No good deed ever goes unpunished, after all. And yet, common sense prevailed, and Mr. Rowlands was not charged, no doubt getting a few gray hairs during the nervous process. Lloyds Bank took a more reasonable approach, rewarding Rowlands with a check for £2,500 for his assistance in solving the crime. Moreover, Lloyds has announced a reward of £30,000 for any information leading to the capture of the remaining criminals, but nobody new was ever found. After serving their prison sentences, Anthony Gavin and the gang members were released. The fame of their unusual method of bank robbery spread far beyond the borders of Great Britain. Immediately after their release, the press tried to contact them to hear the true story of the robbery from the words of the criminals, but they refused. The police closely followed them in hope of getting on the trail of the stolen property, but the former robbers behaved too cautiously, knowing full well that they could be followed. Soon, Gavin and the other members deliberately disappeared into obscurity, perhaps even abroad. Rumors spread that they began to live happily, having bought themselves luxurious houses, expensive cars, and fancy yachts. But even so, they could have done it much earlier if they had not gone to prison for 12 years. The perfect heist they had planned to pull off was ruined by a series of ridiculous mistakes, like the one Benjamin Wolfe made when he rented a store under his own name, and accidents like Robert Rowlands, who was one of the few people in the area who had a CB receiver, miraculously catching the conversations of the bandits and recording it all on a voice recorder, even though the police had previously shown no interest in Rowlands' information. Despite all, the Baker Street robbery has certainly gone down in history and has spawned more rumors and myths than any other robbery, but the mixture of both genius and stupidity on both sides of the law was certainly astonishing.